Title: Shadows Beneath the Promise. Emma and Jake were inseparable. They had been since their sophomore year of high school in small-town Illinois, where summers smelled like freshly cut grass and winters made even the toughest kids bundle up like marshmallows. Their love had seemed destined, the kind of story grandparents told with misty eyes and smiles. But even the brightest fairy tales cast long shadows. Jake had always been the charismatic one, class president, star quarterback, the guy who could make anyone feel like the most important person in the room. Emma, on the other hand, was the quiet achiever. She preferred the comfort of a book in her lap over a crowd, but with Jake, she felt seen. They balanced each other, or so it seemed. A dream turned reality. After graduating high school, they followed what everyone had assumed would be the natural progression. Jake received a scholarship to a college in Chicago, and Emma, though torn about leaving home, enrolled in a nearby liberal arts school to stay close to him. Weekends were filled with trips to the city, the two of them exploring museums, laughing over deep dish pizza, and planning their future. By the time they both graduated, Jake had secured a job at a prominent PR firm, and Emma started her career as a high school English teacher. They moved into a modest apartment downtown, a blend of their personalities, her carefully chosen vintage furniture, and his collection of sports memorabilia. Cracks in the perfect facade. The first cracks began to show when Jake's job demanded more and more of his time. Late nights at the office became routine, and weekend plans were often rescheduled or canceled altogether. Emma, ever patient, told herself it was temporary. "He's building a career for us," she'd say when friends asked if she was okay with his absences. But beneath the surface, Emma began to feel a creeping loneliness. She poured herself into her teaching, staying late to coach the debate team or help struggling students. Still, there were nights when she'd sit at their kitchen table, staring at the cold dinner she had made hours ago, wondering why Jake's texts had gone from detailed updates to curt excuses. The intruder. It wasn't until their 5th anniversary that Emma noticed something truly amiss. Jake had come home late, again, and as he placed his phone on the counter, a message flashed on the screen. The name Sasha appeared, and Emma's stomach twisted. She didn't know a Sasha. "Who's Sasha?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Jake looked startled for a fraction of a second before recovering. "Oh, just a coworker. We're working on a big account together." Emma nodded, but the unease lingered. Over the next few weeks, she noticed more signs. Hushed phone calls in the bathroom, a new cologne he hadn't mentioned, and once, a dinner receipt for a restaurant she'd never heard of. A whisper of the past. Emma's suspicions led her to revisit their shared memories, searching for where things might have started to shift. She thought about Jake's effortless charm, how easily people gravitated toward him. Even in high school, there had been rumors. Girls giggling in hallways, stolen glances, but Emma had dismissed them. Jake loved her. He'd chosen her. Still, the doubts gnawed at her. She began tracking little things. His excuses, the way he avoided eye contact during certain conversations, and the distance growing between them. The confrontation. One evening, after another late night for Jake, Emma decided she couldn't keep quiet anymore. She confronted him as he walked through the door, his tie loosened, and his face weary. "Jake," she began, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Is there something you need to tell me?" He froze, the keys still in his hand. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean, Sasha. The late nights, the lies." Jake's face hardened, his usual charm evaporating. "Emma, I told you. She's a coworker. You're being paranoid." Emma's heart sank at his tone, but she pressed on. "Then why does it feel like you're a million miles away from me? Why do I feel like I'm the only one holding us together?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "Because you don't understand the pressure I'm under. Do you think I like working these hours? I'm doing this for us." "Are you?" Emma asked, her voice breaking. "Because it feels like you're doing it for someone else." Jake didn't answer. He just stared at her, his silence louder than any confession. Emma's discovery. The following day, while Jake was at work, Emma found herself doing something she'd never imagined, going through his phone. The guilt was immediate, but her trembling fingers didn't stop. It didn't take long to find what she feared. A string of messages between Jake and Sasha. Flirty, intimate, and unmistakably inappropriate. The most recent one read, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." Emma felt her world collapse. Tears blurred her vision as she scrolled through the messages, each one a dagger to her heart. The man she had trusted, the man she had built her life around, had betrayed her. The unfinished end. That evening, Emma waited for Jake to come home, her mind a whirlwind of pain, anger, and uncertainty. When he walked through the door, she simply held up his phone, the incriminating messages on the screen. Jake's face fell, all pretense gone. "Emma, don't," she interrupted, her voice cold and steady. "I saw everything." There was a long silence as Jake searched for words, but none came. Emma, feeling both liberated and shattered, stood. "I don't know what happens next," she said, her voice trembling, "but I deserve better than this." And with that, she left the room, leaving Jake alone in their once shared space, the weight of his choices crashing down on him. The questions left behind. The story ends here, unfinished, with questions lingering in the air. Will Emma forgive Jake and try to rebuild what they had? Or will she walk away for good? Can Jake redeem himself? Or is the damage too deep? And most importantly, can two people who grew up together, who shared a lifetime of memories, find a way to reconcile the betrayal that now stands between them? Some stories don't have tidy endings, just the echoes of choices and the paths they lead to. The aftermath. Emma didn't sleep that night. The weight of Jake's betrayal pressed down on her chest, making every breath feel like a struggle. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every moment of their relationship. Each memory, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cruel joke. By morning, she decided she couldn't stay in the apartment. Not yet. She packed a bag with just the essentials. Clothes, her favorite book, her journal. She needed time to think, away from the reminders of their life together. Jake had stayed on the couch all night, not daring to approach her. When he heard the sound of her suitcase wheels rolling across the hardwood floor, he sat up abruptly. "Emma, wait," he said, his voice hoarse. "Where are you going?" She paused at the door, not turning to look at him. "I don't know. Somewhere that isn't here." "Please," he pleaded, stepping closer. "We need to talk. I can explain." She turned then, her eyes flashing with anger. "Explain what, Jake? That you've been sneaking around with another woman? That you've been lying to me for months? What part of this do you think I don't already understand?" He looked down, his shoulders sagging. "I made a mistake. I screwed up, Emma, but I love you. Doesn't that count for something?" "Not anymore," she said quietly, the words cutting through the air like a blade. And then she walked out, leaving him standing alone. A new beginning or an illusion? Emma moved in with her older sister, Maggie, who lived on the other side of town. Maggie had always been the protective one, and when Emma showed up at her doorstep with red-rimmed eyes and a suitcase, Maggie didn't ask questions. She just hugged her and said, "Stay as long as you need." Over the next few days, Emma tried to find a sense of normalcy. She threw herself into her work, grading papers late into the night and volunteering for extra shifts with the debate team. But every quiet moment was filled with questions she couldn't answer. Why had Jake betrayed her? Was their entire relationship a lie? And what was she supposed to do now? Meanwhile, Jake wasn't faring much better. The apartment felt empty without Emma, and every corner held a memory of her. He tried calling her, texting her, but her responses were either curt or non-existent. He knew he'd hurt her deeply, but he wasn't ready to give up. In his desperation, Jake did something he hadn't done in years. He drove back to their hometown. Returning to the past, the streets of their old town were eerily unchanged. Jake parked in front of the diner where he and Emma used to go after Friday night football games. He sat in the car for a while, staring at the neon sign flickering in the window, before finally going inside. The waitress recognized him immediately. "Jake Reynolds," she said with a smile. "Haven't seen you in years. How's life treating you?" He forced a smile. Complicated. She nodded knowingly, pouring him a cup of coffee without asking. Aren't we all? As Jake sat there, he found himself thinking about the boy he used to be. The one who couldn't imagine a future without Emma. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of that. But could he get it back? The unexpected visitor. Back at Maggie's house, Emma was starting to feel like she could breathe again. She hadn't spoken to Jake since she left, and the space gave her clarity. But one evening, as she was settling down with a cup of tea, there was a knock at the door. Maggie answered it, and Emma heard her sharp intake of breath. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to her," came the reply. Emma's stomach twisted at the sound of Jake's voice. Maggie stepped into the living room, her expression tight. "He's here." Emma's first instinct was to send him away, but something made her pause. She stood, her heart pounding, and walked to the door. Jake looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, and his usually confident posture was slumped. He held a small box in his hands. "Emma," he said softly, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I needed to give you this." He held out the box. She took it hesitantly, opening it to find a stack of old letters. Letters they'd written to each other in high school. Jake had kept every one. "I found these when I went back home," he said. "I read through them and I realized how far I've fallen from the person I was. The person who promised to always put you first." Emma's throat tightened as she sifted through the letters. Each one was a snapshot of their early days, filled with dreams and promises. But the reality of the present overshadowed them. "This doesn't erase what you did," she said finally, her voice trembling. "You broke us, Jake." "I know," he said, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix it. If you'll let me." The unfinished decision. Emma didn't respond right away. She closed the box, her fingers tracing its edges, and looked at Jake. For the first time, she saw not just the man who had betrayed her, but the boy she had fallen in love with, and the cracks that had formed in both of them over the years. "I need time," she said finally. Jake nodded, his eyes filled with both hope and sorrow. "Take all the time you need." As he left, Emma sat alone with the box of letters, her emotions swirling. Could she forgive him? Did she even want to? Or was this the moment she finally let go of the past and moved on? The answer remained just out of reach, leaving the next chapter of their story unwritten. The letters. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The box of letters sat on the bedside table like a silent witness, its weight far heavier than its size suggested. She reached over, picked up the first letter, and unfolded it carefully, as though the fragile paper might crumble under her touch. The handwriting was Jake's, familiar and messy, from their senior year of high school. The letter talked about their plans to leave their hometown, their dreams of building a life together. It ended with a simple, heartfelt promise. "No matter where we go or what happens, you'll always be my home." Emma set the letter down, her chest tightening. The words were so sincere, so full of the boy Jake used to be. But the man he'd become had shattered that promise. Could she reconcile the two? She read another letter, and then another, each one pulling her deeper into their shared past. By the time she reached the bottom of the stack, the sky outside was beginning to lighten. She felt drained, but for the first time in weeks, there was clarity in her exhaustion. Jake's reckoning. Jake returned to their apartment, the silence almost unbearable. He hadn't slept either, his mind replaying the moment Emma had looked at him. Not with the love he had taken for granted, but with pain and distrust. He couldn't blame her. He hated himself for what he'd done, for allowing the thrill of something new to cloud what had always been most important. Sasha had been a distraction, a reckless escape from the pressures of his job, his life, his own insecurities. But that distraction had cost him everything. Jake stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, his bloodshot eyes staring back like those of a stranger. He knew apologies weren't enough. Words wouldn't rebuild what he had broken. He needed to show Emma that he was willing to fight for her, to prove that she was still his home, even if she wasn't sure she wanted to be. Maggie's warning. The next morning, Emma sat at the kitchen table with Maggie, sipping coffee. Maggie's expression was as sharp as her words. "Emma, I love you, but you need to think carefully about what you're doing," Maggie said, her tone protective. "Jake's good at making people believe in him, but what happens if he slips up again? You deserve better than to live in fear of another betrayal." "I know," Emma said quietly, "but it's not that simple. We've been together for so long. He's part of my life, my history. How do you just walk away from that?" "You walk away because you deserve someone who won't make you question your worth," Maggie replied. "History doesn't mean you have to write the same future." Emma sighed, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Maggie was right. She knew that, but knowing it didn't make it easier. An unexpected message. Later that day, Emma received an email from Sasha. At first, she thought it was a mistake, but as she opened it, her heart sank. The subject line read, "You deserve to know the truth." The email was short and direct. "I'm sorry for what happened. I didn't know about you at first, and by the time I found out, I was already in too deep. Jake ended things weeks ago, and I want you to know that he regrets it. For what it's worth, I never wanted to hurt you." Emma stared at the screen, her emotions swirling. Sasha's message wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It felt genuine, almost like closure, but it also forced Emma to confront a reality she had been avoiding. Jake had made a terrible mistake, but he had ended the affair. He had chosen to come back. A visit to the past. Unable to find peace, Emma decided to return to their hometown for the weekend. She hadn't been back since her parents had moved away, but the familiarity of the streets and landmarks brought a strange comfort. She visited their old high school, sitting on the bleachers where they had shared their first kiss. She walked by the diner where they'd spent countless afternoons dreaming about their future. At each stop, she felt a mixture of nostalgia and grief. The past was so vivid here, so intertwined with the person Jake had been, and the person she used to be. But was it enough to save what they had now? Jake's gesture. When Emma returned to Maggie's house, she found a note taped to the front door. It was from Jake. "I know I've lost your trust, and I may never get it back. But if you're willing, meet me tonight. I want to show you something. J*****. Emma hesitated, but curiosity and a flicker of hope nudged her forward. She drove to the address Jake had included in the note, a small park on the edge of the city. When she arrived, she found Jake standing under a gazebo, surrounded by strings of white lights. On a table nearby was a photo album. As she approached, Jake looked up, his expression nervous but determined. "I've been thinking about everything," he began, his voice raw, "and I realized I can't ask you to forgive me without showing you why I want to fight for us." He opened the photo album, revealing pictures of their life together. High school dances, college road trips, lazy Sundays in their first apartment. On the last page was a photo of them standing in front of their current apartment, smiling like they had the world at their feet. "I've spent so much time trying to fix things in my head," Jake said, "but I forgot to show you how much you mean to me. This is our story, Emma, and I don't want it to end here." Emma's throat tightened as she looked at the photos, memories flooding back. She felt torn, between the love she still felt and the pain she couldn't ignore. The open ending. Emma closed the album gently, her hands trembling. She looked at Jake, his eyes pleading, and felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. This was a moment that would define them, not just as a couple but as individuals. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she said softly, her voice trembling, "but I can't pretend I don't still care." Jake nodded, his expression a mix of relief and regret. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn that trust, Emma. Just tell me where to start." Emma turned to look at the lights around the gazebo, their glow soft and hopeful. The answer wasn't clear, not yet, but for the first time she felt like maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. Or maybe they couldn't, and that uncertainty was where their story remained, for now. A whisper of hope. Emma stood under the gazebo, her thoughts a storm of conflicting emotions. The glowing lights around her felt symbolic, a fragile beauty against the darkness. Jake's plea was genuine, and the photo album stirred something in her heart. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. "I need time," Emma said, stepping away. "I can't promise anything, Jake." Jake nodded, though his expression betrayed his disappointment. "I understand. Just don't shut me out completely. Please." Emma didn't answer, leaving him under the glow of the lights. As she drove back to Maggie's, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. A piece of the puzzle she hadn't yet uncovered. The unexpected ally. The next morning, Emma received another email from Sasha. This time it was longer, more detailed, and impossible to ignore. "Emma, I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear, but I think you should know more about what happened. Jake isn't the only one who made mistakes. There's something he doesn't know, and it could change everything. If you're willing, I'd like to meet in person. No pressure, but I think you deserve the full truth. Sasha ***. Emma stared at the message, her heart pounding. What else could there possibly be? Against her better judgment, she replied with a single word. When? The meeting. Sasha suggested a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city, far enough from prying eyes. Emma arrived early, her stomach in knots. When Sasha walked in, Emma was struck by how ordinary she looked. No femme fatale, no larger-than-life rival. Just a woman, nervous and tired. "Thank you for meeting me," Sasha said as she sat down. "I'm not sure why I'm here," Emma admitted, her tone guarded. Sasha nodded, fiddling with her coffee cup. "I get it, but I couldn't let this sit on my conscience anymore." "Let what sit?" Emma asked, her voice sharp. "You've already admitted to the affair. What more is there?" Sasha hesitated, then leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I ended things with Jake weeks ago because I found out something disturbing. He wasn't the only one in the wrong. Someone's been watching both of us. And they're not just watching, they're interfering." Emma blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Sasha pulled out her phone and showed Emma a series of emails and text messages. Anonymous messages she had received during the affair. They were detailed, almost orchestrated, encouraging her to pursue Jake and subtly planting seeds of doubt about his relationship with Emma. "I thought they were just, I don't know, a jealous coworker or something," Sasha said. "But the more I looked into it, the more I realized these messages weren't random. Whoever this is, they know both of you. They wanted this to happen." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "Why would someone do that?" "I don't know," Sasha admitted, "but I think you should. Someone's trying to ruin your life, Emma, and they're using Jake to do it." Jake's own discovery. Meanwhile, Jake was back at the apartment, pacing. His guilt hadn't subsided, but something Sasha had said before ending the affair lingered in his mind. "You're not the only one being lied to." The comment hadn't made sense at the time, but now it felt significant. Jake started digging into his emails, his phone records, even his work accounts. What he found shocked him. There were messages sent from his email to Sasha. Messages he hadn't written. Flirty, suggestive notes that matched the tone of their actual conversations but were just enough to escalate things. The timestamps aligned with nights he'd been working late, nights he had no memory of writing anything. Someone had been impersonating him. A new suspect. That evening, Emma and Jake crossed paths unexpectedly. Emma had returned to the apartment to pick up a few things, and Jake was waiting for her, his expression grim. "I need to talk to you," he said as soon as she stepped inside. "I don't think I'm ready for that," Emma replied, her voice tight. "This isn't about us," Jake said. "It's about something bigger. Someone's been messing with us, Emma. I found fake emails in my account. Messages I never sent to Sasha." Emma froze, Sasha's words echoing in her mind. "You're sure?" Jake nodded, holding up his phone. "Look at this. They're fake, but they're convincing. Someone wanted her to believe I was more invested than I was. And now I'm wondering, who benefits from tearing us apart?" Connecting the dots. Emma shared what Sasha had told her, and the pieces started to fall into place. Someone had been pulling strings, manipulating them both. But the question remained. Who? "Do you think it's someone from work?" Emma asked. A jealous coworker? Maybe, Jake said, but his tone was uncertain. Or it could be someone from our past. Emma's mind flashed to their hometown, to old friends and enemies. She thought about Maggie's warnings, about the people who might have envied their relationship. Suddenly, one name stood out, Logan. Logan had been Jake's best friend in high school, until a falling out senior year. He'd always had a thing for Emma, though she'd never reciprocated. Could he still be harboring resentment? The confrontation. Jake and Emma decided to investigate quietly, starting with Logan. Jake reached out under the pretense of catching up, and Logan eagerly agreed to meet. When they arrived at the bar, Logan seemed overly enthusiastic, his grin wide and almost too friendly. You too, Logan said, raising a glass. The golden couple. How's life treating you? Emma exchanged a glance with Jake, her instincts on high alert. Logan's charm felt forced, his words laced with subtle jabs about their relationship. After some polite conversation, Jake leaned in. Logan, let's cut the small talk. Do you know anything about someone trying to mess with me and Emma? Logan's smile faltered for a split second before he laughed. What? Why would I know anything about that? But his reaction was enough to plant suspicion. Jake pressed further. I'm serious. Someone's been sending fake emails, stirring up trouble. If you know something, now's the time to speak up. Logan's face hardened. You're paranoid, Jake. Maybe you should look closer to home. The mystery deepens. Logan left abruptly, but his words lingered. Emma and Jake were more certain than ever that he knew something, but they couldn't prove it. Yet, that night, as Emma lay awake in her childhood bed at Maggie's house, her phone buzzed with a new message. The sender was anonymous, and the message was chilling. You're getting too close. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. Emma stared at the screen, her pulse racing. The pieces were coming together, but the picture they formed was darker than she had imagined. Someone wanted her broken, and they weren't finished yet. The question wasn't just who, but why. And what would they do next? The stakes rise. Emma couldn't shake the anonymous message. The stark threat was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, and it cemented her resolve to uncover the truth. She immediately called Jake, who answered on the first ring. Emma? He said, his voice tense. What's wrong? She hesitated, then read him the message verbatim. There was silence on the line before Jake finally spoke. We need to take this seriously. Whoever this is, they're not just messing with our relationship, they're playing a bigger game. Emma agreed, and they decided to dig deeper. The first step was to revisit what they knew. The fake emails, the texts Sasha received, and now this direct threat to Emma. The common thread was clear. Someone close to them had access to their lives, and they weren't afraid to manipulate from the shadows. Old ties, new threats. The next day, Emma and Jake returned to their hometown together for the first time since their relationship hit rock bottom. It felt strange to be back as a united front, even if the bond between them was tenuous. They knew they needed answers, and all signs pointed to Logan. Logan, however, had gone silent. Calls and messages went unanswered, and when Jake drove past Logan's house, the curtains were drawn tight, the driveway empty. Do you think he skipped town? Emma asked as they sat in the car, parked a block away. Jake shook his head. No, he's here. He's just hiding. Emma looked at him, her brows furrowed. Why would Logan do this? He has no reason to mess with us. Unless he still has something to prove, Jake finished. To me, to you, to both of us. Emma shuddered. Logan had always been intense, especially when it came to her. Could his resentment really have festered for all these years? The missing puzzle piece. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Jake decided to reach out to an unlikely ally, Sasha. They met at a coffee shop in the city, and Emma joined them reluctantly, unsure of what Sasha could add. But Sasha surprised them both. I did some digging of my own, she said, pulling out her phone. Those anonymous messages I got, they weren't as untraceable as whoever sent them thought. Jake leaned forward. What did you find? Sasha tapped on her phone and showed them a screen with an IP address and a location. a small co-working space not far from Logan's home. Emma's eyes widened. You're saying whoever sent the messages to you, and probably me, was working from here? Exactly, Sasha said. I couldn't find much else, but it's something. Jake clenched his jaw. It's enough. Let's go. The co-working space. The building was unassuming. A converted warehouse with large windows and a faded sign that read, Shared Horizons Workspace. Inside, the atmosphere was quiet, with only a handful of people scattered at desks. Jake approached the front desk, where a bored-looking receptionist greeted him. We're looking for someone who might rent space here, Jake said, trying to sound casual. Is there a way to check? The receptionist shook her head. We don't give out client information. Emma stepped forward, her tone sharp. Someone here has been harassing us. We need answers, and we're not leaving until we get them. The receptionist blinked, startled by her intensity, but before she could respond, a figure emerged from one of the side rooms. It was Logan. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. Jake's fists clenched at his sides. Logan smirked. Well, isn't this a surprise? The confrontation. Logan, Jake said, his voice cold. What the hell is going on? Are you behind this? Logan crossed his arms, leaning casually against the doorway. Define this, Jake. If you're talking about your little drama with Emma, I wouldn't waste my time. Don't play dumb, Emma snapped. The emails, the messages. Someone's been pulling the strings, and it all leads back to you. Logan laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. You think I'd waste my time sabotaging your perfect little love story? Please, you two destroyed yourselves without my help. Then why are you here? Jake demanded, his voice rising. Why the fake emails? Why the threats? Logan's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing. You're giving me too much credit. But maybe you should think about who else might have a reason to want you two apart. The words hung in the air like a challenge. A twist in the tale. Emma and Jake left the co-working space more confused than ever. Logan's cryptic words lingered in Emma's mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something she was missing. Later that night, back at Maggie's, Emma decided to review the messages one more time. As she scrolled through them, a pattern began to emerge. Phrases and details that felt strangely familiar. Her breath caught as realization dawned. Maggie, Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Her sister appeared in the doorway. What is it? Emma held up her phone. These messages. They sound like you. Maggie's expression didn't change, but her silence spoke volumes. Emma's heart sank. Tell me it's not true, Emma said, her voice breaking. Tell me you didn't do this. Maggie sighed, her shoulders slumping. I didn't mean for it to go this far. The shocking truth. Maggie confessed everything. She had seen Emma struggling in her relationship with Jake and believed that their bond was toxic. In her mind, sabotaging them wasn't cruelty, it was protection. I thought if I could push you two apart, you'd finally see how much better off you are without him, Maggie said. But then, it spiraled out of control. Emma stared at her sister in disbelief. You manipulated me. You lied to me. I did it for you, Maggie insisted, tears in her eyes. I wanted you to be happy. Emma shook her head, stepping back. This wasn't your choice to make. You've destroyed everything. The open ending. Emma sat alone that night, torn between betrayal and heartbreak. Her sister's interference had shattered her trust, but it didn't erase the pain Jake had caused. The truth was more complicated than ever, and she was left with a choice she didn't know how to make. Would she try to rebuild what she and Jake had? Or would she walk away, leaving behind both the man she loved and the sister who thought she was protecting her? The answer remained uncertain, the future a question mark waiting to be written. For now, Emma could only sit with the pieces of her life, wondering which ones were worth picking up and which were better left behind. Confronting the depth of betrayal, Emma sat alone in the darkened living room, Maggie's confession replaying in her mind. The sister she had trusted unconditionally had manipulated her life, her emotions, and her future. Yet, as angry and betrayed as Emma felt, There was something she couldn't ignore. Maggie's interference wouldn't have worked if her relationship with Jake hadn't already been fragile. The next morning, Emma decided she needed clarity, not just from Maggie but from herself. She packed a bag, told Maggie she needed space, and drove back to the apartment she had once shared with Jake. She wasn't sure if she was ready to see him, but she needed to be in the space where it had all unraveled. Jake's resolve. Jake hadn't expected to see Emma so soon. When she walked through the door, her expression guarded but determined, his heart leapt and sank simultaneously. He knew the weight of their shared mistakes hung heavy between them. "I know about Maggie," Emma said bluntly, her voice steady. Jake blinked, confused. "What about Maggie?" "She's been behind a lot of this," Emma continued. "The messages to Sasha, the anonymous threats. She thought she was protecting me." Jake sat down heavily on the couch, rubbing his temples. "Maggie? I mean, I always knew she wasn't my biggest fan, but why? She thought I'd be happier without you," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. "And maybe she's right." Jake looked up sharply. "Is that what you believe?" Emma hesitated, the weight of the question pressing on her. "I don't know what I believe anymore. Everything feels so tangled, what's real, what's not. I don't even know if I trust myself, let alone you." Jake stood and moved closer, his voice soft but firm. "Then let me help you untangle it. I can't undo what's happened, Emma. I can't erase my mistakes, but I can prove to you that I'm not the same man who hurt you." Emma held his gaze, searching for any trace of the boy she had loved for so long. "How do I know this isn't just more words?" "You don't," Jake admitted, "but I'm willing to do the work to show you. I just need you to give me the chance." Uncovering Maggie's motive. Later that week, Emma decided to confront Maggie. She invited her sister to meet at a neutral location, a park they used to visit as kids. When Maggie arrived, her expression was a mixture of guilt and defiance. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," Maggie said as soon as they sat down. "I just wanted to protect you from more pain." Emma crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "You call this protecting me? You manipulated me, Maggie. You tore apart my relationship and pushed me into chaos." "I wasn't the one who cheated," Maggie retorted, her voice rising. "Jake did that all on his own." Emma flinched at the reminder, but she held her ground. "You don't get to decide what's best for me. That's not your call." Maggie sighed, her anger deflating. "I know I crossed a line, Emma. I watched you hold on to Jake for so long, even when it was hurting you. I thought if I could push you to let go, you'd finally see how much more you deserve." Emma softened slightly, hearing the pain in her sister's voice. "You might have thought you were helping, but you didn't give me a choice. You took away my agency, Maggie. That's not love, that's control." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Emma. I really am. I just didn't know how else to help." Emma nodded, her emotions still raw. "I need time, Maggie. I don't know what our relationship looks like after this, but I need space to figure it out." A surprising revelation. As Emma worked to process the layers of betrayal from both Maggie and Jake, an unexpected phone call shifted everything again. It was Sasha. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," Sasha began, her tone hesitant, "but I think you need to see something." Emma frowned. "What is it?" Sasha explained that she had continued investigating the messages and emails she had received during her affair with Jake. She discovered that some of them had been sent not just from Maggie but from another unknown source. "I thought Maggie was working alone," Sasha said. "But there's another player in this game, Emma. Someone else is pulling strings, and I think it's someone from Jake's past." Emma's mind raced. If there was another person involved, it meant the manipulation ran deeper than she had realized. "Do you know who?" Sasha hesitated. "Not yet, but I'm close." The mysterious figure. Emma shared Sasha's findings with Jake, who immediately began thinking back to his old connections. "There was someone," Jake said slowly, "back in high school, a guy named Darren. He had a thing for you, Emma. He was always jealous of us, and he got into some shady stuff after graduation. I haven't seen him in years, but what?" Emma pressed. But he's the kind of person who would hold a grudge, Jake finished. And he always wanted to see me fail. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Do you think he's behind this? I don't know, Jake admitted. But if he is, we need to find him before he does more damage. Setting the trap, Emma and Jake decided to lure Darren out. With Sasha's help, they crafted a fake message that appeared to be from Maggie, suggesting that she had more information about Emma and Jake's relationship. They sent the message to an email address linked to Darren, hoping it would provoke a response. The trap worked. Darren replied almost immediately, asking to meet at a local dive bar. Emma and Jake, with Sasha's support, prepared for the confrontation. When they arrived, Darren was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a smug expression. The moment he saw them, his smirk widened. Well, look who decided to show up, Darren drawled. The golden couple. Emma felt her anger surge, but she kept her voice steady. Why, Darren? Why go through all this trouble to ruin our lives? Darren leaned back, his eyes glinting with malice. Because it's fun watching people like you fall apart. You think you're so perfect, but you're just as messed up as the rest of us. I just gave you a little push. Jake's fists clenched, but Emma placed a hand on his arm, keeping him grounded. You're pathetic, she said, her voice cold. And you're done. Darren laughed, but his bravado faltered when a police officer stepped into the bar. Sasha had already contacted the authorities, providing evidence of Darren's cyberstalking and harassment. As Darren was escorted out, Emma and Jake exchanged a look, exhausted but united. The open ending. In the aftermath, Emma and Jake stood at a crossroads. The truth had been uncovered, and the external forces threatening them had been dealt with. But the wounds between them were still raw, the scars of betrayal and mistrust lingering. As they sat together in their quiet apartment, Jake reached for Emma's hand. We've been through hell, he said softly, but I still want to fight for us. Do you? Emma looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of their shared history. I don't know, she admitted, but maybe we can try. The future was uncertain, their path unclear. But for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope, a fragile light in the darkness, waiting to grow, steps toward healing. The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act. Emma and Jake lived in a tentative truce, rebuilding their lives one fragile step at a time. The truth about Darren's interference and Maggie's misguided actions had given them clarity, but the damage they'd inflicted on each other couldn't be erased with a single apology or revelation. Emma spent more time at the apartment, though she hadn't officially moved back in. She kept her distance emotionally, testing the waters cautiously, while Jake made every effort to show her he was serious about changing. He left work on time, planned quiet dinners, and avoided even the appearance of impropriety. But for Emma, the real battle wasn't in forgiving Jake. It was in trusting herself to believe in them again. The letter. One evening, while cleaning out an old box of keepsakes, Emma found something she hadn't seen in years. An unsent letter she'd written to Jake during their first year of college. At the time, they'd had their first major fight, and Emma had written the letter as a way of processing her feelings. She'd never given it to him, and over time, she'd forgotten it even existed. Now, reading it brought back a flood of memories. Jake, we've been together for so long that sometimes it feels like we've forgotten who we are outside of each other. I love you, but I'm scared. Scared of what happens if we lose sight of why we started this journey together. I need to know that we're in this for the right reasons, not just because it's all we've ever known, but because it's what we want, what we choose. Always, Emma ***. The words struck a chord, as relevant now as they were back then. Emma realized that her fear wasn't just about Jake's betrayal. It was about whether they were still the same people who fell in love, or if they had outgrown each other. Turning point. The next morning, Emma handed Jake the letter. I wrote this a long time ago, she said softly, but I think it's still true now. Jake read it silently, his expression shifting from curiosity to introspection. When he finished, he looked at her, his voice quiet. You've always been the wiser one between us. I think I forgot to ask myself the same question. Are we still what we want? Or just what we know? Emma nodded, her heart pounding. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Jake set the letter down and reached for her hand. Then let's figure it out together. No more pretending everything's fine. No more ignoring the hard stuff. We face it head on or we walk away. But if we do this, I need you to know, I'm all in. Emma looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of hesitation. But all she saw was sincerity. Maggie's redemption. Emma didn't cut Maggie out of her life entirely, though their relationship remained strained. Maggie apologized again, this time without excuses, and Emma could see that her sister was genuinely remorseful. Over time, they began to rebuild their bond, though Emma was careful to set boundaries. I know I can't take back what I did, Maggie admitted one day over coffee, but I want you to know I've learned my lesson. Your life is yours to live, Emma. I just hope you'll let me be part of it. Emma nodded, her voice soft. I want that too, but it's going to take time. Maggie smiled faintly. I'll wait as long as it takes. A new chapter. Months passed, and Emma and Jake continued their cautious reconciliation. They sought counseling together, peeling back the layers of their relationship and confronting the cracks that had formed over the years. It wasn't easy. There were tears, fights, and moments when it felt like giving up would be simpler. But each time they chose to keep going. One evening, as they walked along the lakefront, Jake paused and turned to Emma. You know, he said, his voice tinged with nervousness. I never thought we'd get here. Where's here? Emma asked, smiling faintly. Somewhere better, he replied. Not perfect, not like it was before, but real. Emma looked out at the water, the soft ripples reflecting the sunset. It's not easy starting over, she said, but I think we're worth it. Jake slipped his hand into hers. I know we are. The open road. Though Emma and Jake had come a long way, their story didn't end with a tidy bow. They knew there would always be challenges, doubts, and the shadow of what had happened. But they also knew that love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. As they walked back toward their apartment, Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. She and Jake had faced their darkest moments and come out stronger. Not unscathed, but stronger. Life wasn't a fairy tale, Emma realized. It was a story you wrote together, one chapter at a time. And for now, their story wasn't ending, it was just beginning again. ####a fresh start. Emma and Jake stood on the balcony of their apartment, watching the city lights twinkle like scattered stars. It had been a year since everything fell apart, and though the road to this moment had been long and painful, it had been worth it. They weren't the same people they once were, and that was okay. They had grown, not just as individuals but as partners who chose to rebuild something new together. Jake took a deep breath, his voice steady as he spoke. Thank you for giving me a second chance, Emma. I'll never take it for granted. Emma turned to him, her smile soft but full of meaning. Thank you for proving to me that we were worth it. I didn't just forgive you. I chose to believe in us again. They shared a quiet moment, the kind that didn't need words. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer defined them. What mattered was the future they were creating, one step at a time. As they stood there, Emma realized that life would always be messy, full of unexpected turns and challenges. But for now, she felt hope. A fragile, beautiful hope that whispered of brighter days ahead. And so, their story didn't end with a grand declaration or a perfect resolution. Instead, it ended as all real stories do, with the promise of a new chapter, unwritten and waiting to unfold. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. ****